Making tomato sauce from scratch. Start with fresh tomatoes. These are from my garden. Wash them thoroughly. Make sure you get all the dirt and gook off them. Scoop out the inside and the seeds. Cut them into quarters and put them in a pot. You could either use this, a food mill, or I use my KitchenAid to do that. I have the strainer attachment. I used to use the food mill until I discovered that my KitchenAid had a strainer attachment. So today I was using the tomatoes raw. Normally, what I like to do when I want a really thick sauce, this is a fairly thin sauce, but when I make a really thick sauce, I'll take those tomatoes, put a little bit of water in the pot and boil them. So there's the pot. Normally I would boil it for probably between 15 minutes to a half hour. It loosens up the skins and it's easier to clean. So so you're able to go through the strainer. I didn't really want a thick sauce this time, so I decided that I was going to use the tomatoes raw versus parboiling them for 20 minutes or so. All the waste comes out of one end and the juice comes down on the other. Once I'm done, I fill up the pot. As you can see, there's quite a bit of sauce from all those tomatoes. So I used almost every single tomato that I had prior. Now, when the waste comes out, it's skin, some of it is the meat and seeds. What I do is I will take that waste and I will put it through at least 2 more times to get the most out of the sauce I can possibly get. The next step is to actually do the canning process. So what I do is I put my bottles or my jars in the dishwasher and I put them on the sanitize setting. And when you go to fill your bottles, your jars really, they should be hot when you do that. So this way when you take the hot sauce and pour it into the jars will not crack. The jars must be sterilized, the rings must be sterilized, and the lids must be sterilized. Now I've had my tomatoes cooking for about 2.5 hours, and if you notice, it really has cooked down quite a bit. I probably could cook it down a little bit longer, but it's like 1 o'clock in the morning or 12 o'clock. I'm exhausted. I gotta go to bed. So I stir it up. It's a thin sauce, which is what I wanted. That's perfectly fine. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill each jar with a 1/4 teaspoon for the pint of citric acid. Citric acid is going to be the preservative, so this way you can use the sauce from, a year and a half. A 1/4 teaspoon inside each jar. And then I'm going to take my fresh basil and I'm going to put that in the sauce. Now, the basil is an important question. Which basil do you use? Well, if the basil leaf is dark in color, like black, you really shouldn't do it. My father always said don't use the black portion of the basil leaf because it makes the sauce bitter. That's also when you're making pesto. You don't want to use the black part of the leaves of the basil. So each jar gets 1 or 2 pieces of basil. That's going to add a little bit to the flavor, and I don't put anything else in the sauce. When I go to use this sauce, there's no salt in it, only the citric acid and the flavoring from the basil. After, when I go to use it, then I'll add the chopped onions and the peppers or whatever I decide to use it for. If I'm going to use it in a stew or whether I'm going to make it in a pasta dish or whatever. So here I am. I'm looking for the best basil I can find because I picked it, again, like I said, fresh, but you got to be careful because you don't want icky basil leaves in there. Okay, so now we're going to get ready to fill the jars. I'm going to take my funnel, and I'm going to take the sauce. I have a special um, ladle which I can hang on the edge of the pot between fillings. So I put usually between 2 or 3 inside the jar, and I'm going to keep filling it until it reaches a certain level. There's a little green tool that I'm going to be using next. It helps measure how close to the top of the jar you can get before you seal it up. There's that little green tool, and it has ridges on the end, and it'll show you how high the sauce should be, and each recipe is different. It'll tell you how close to the top of the edge of the jar it should be. So that's where I'm targeting right there. And then you're going to take that, and you're going to, after you fill it up to the proper measurement, you're going to take that and you're going to put it inside the sauce, and you're going to stir it around inside the jar because you're trying to get all the bubbles out. You don't want any air bubbles inside your tomato sauce. So you keep turning and turning and turning, make sure that you get all the air bubbles out. The jar is going to be really, really hot, so you might want to, put something on your hands other than a thin piece of glove. Then you're going to take a wet paper towel or a wet cloth, and you are going to gently scoop the tomato sauce off the top of the bottle and the edge, all the way around the edge of the bottle. You're going to use this tool. It's a magnetic tool. You pick up the lid, never touch the lid itself. Put the lid on and then screw on the cap. Finger tight. It doesn't have to be super, super tight because it's going to seal when it goes inside the water. So again, in goes the funnel. Fill it up. Although I did say it's a thin sauce, it's really not that thin when you take a really good look at it. Now, I've been doing this for such a long time that I can kind of eyeball how close the sauce should be to the top of the lid. But I check anyway, put it down, go around, make sure you get all those bubbles out. Take your magnetic tool. Oh, clean off the lid. Yes, don't forget to clean off the jar. And you can't leave any residue on there because you don't want to get botulism or anything like that. Alright, so you're going to put in the magnetic tool, pull it out, put it on the top, put the lid on top, and tighten it up. Finger tight, not too tight because then you're not going to be able to get it off. You continue doing that until all the jars are filled. Now, if you have one jar at the end that's not filled to the top, you cannot preserve it. You should use it for your next meal. The sauce is still good, but you definitely can't use it unless you put it in a smaller jar, a sanitized jar. Then you can definitely use that. So if you use like a jelly jar or something like that, you could save them. I just usually use it in, for the next day. Or you can just freeze it. Alright, so not to bore you, I'm just going to put it in fast motion. So I am going to continue the process until all the jars are filled. All right, so now we're at the point where we're going to actually boil the tomatoes. You don't have to use a pressure cooker. You could use any kind of water bath because that's how you do tomatoes. It's a water bath. So you're going to take your tomatoes and you are going to gently place them inside your water bath. The water should reach the top of the tomato jars, and as you keep placing in more jars, the water will displace upward, so it's going to get higher. So you got to make sure that your pot is big enough to accommodate all the water as it starts to come up. You're going to leave the jars inside the boiling bath for 35 minutes to 40 minutes depending on the size of your jars. So I have pint jars, they're going to stay in there for between 35 to 40 minutes. If you have quart size bottles, I like to keep them in there for about 45 minutes, just to make sure. So there were the sanitized lids, and that's what it looks like inside the water bath. I'm going to put the top on there and I'm going to let it boil for a good 35 minutes. So it's been boiling for 35 minutes. Take the lid off. Now make sure that you turn the lid away from you because you're going to have hot boiling water and you don't want to get burned. You're going to use I don't know what they call them, but your grasper thingy, I don't know what it's called. Anyway, you're going to use that and you're going to lift it up and you're going to put them on the counter. Now what I usually do is I will take them and drain the water off the top, and I'll put them on a paper towel to absorb the water. They are hot, so you have to be careful not to touch the glass. It's gonna burn. When they're sitting out, they will slowly start to cool off, and that's when the lids will actually start the sealing process, and later on you're going to hear them. Listen closely for the popping sound. Each one of your jars should pop. Some jars will not pop right away. They take a little bit longer than the others. That's not a problem. By the next day, though, when you touch the top of the lid should not be able to be pushed in. If it gives, then that means that it hasn't sealed properly. It's still good. You could use it, but you have to use it the next day. Or you can freeze it for future use. Hope you enjoyed the process. Bye.